Today we're going to talk about stress. So stress has been with us since all time immemorial, okay? It's been a very integral part of our life. At first it was a defense mechanism designed to protect us from aggression, to help us cope with new situations. It was an adaptive mechanism that our bodies have to react to our environment, to help us maintain our normal, what we call homeostasis in medicine, our normal status quo, the normal state in which we are. And our ancestors, for whom danger was ever present, from wild animals to climate to enemies, adapted to their environment and survived because of the stress response. And in effect, for them, the alarm phase that we call, and we're going to talk about these phases of stress, the alarm phase that we called stress prepared them to fight or flee in the face of danger. And this collection of reactions that the body has to confronting a dangerous situation is what we call the stress response. But times have changed. And we no longer are faced with lions. Most of the time we're not faced with this. But our bodies all react in the same way to whatever the stresses are. And so we have what we call a stress response. And I'm going to come back to this one as we look at what happens with stress. But nowadays our stress is more this. A pile of work that we have to face with a deadline, or fortunately not in northern Maine, but certainly in Boston this is what we face, or California, Montreal, Toronto, wherever, yeah.
I believe that's California.
That's probably California, yeah.
Yeah, because it had palm trees.
And some of us face this as well, okay, with a very angry colleague. Many of us know this one. Where we're facing financial struggles, and especially today where everything is getting more expensive and our incomes are not increasing, but our financial outlays are. And so we get this tremendous overload of stress, and it causes very serious health problems. So our stress response has no idea that we're now in the 21st century. It still thinks we need to be prepared for being chased by a lion. And it doesn't know the difference between a lion chasing us and gridlock on the freeway or the angry colleague or the debt load that we have. And the body secretes the same hormones and everything. Now I'm going to go back to that previous slide which shows the stress response here.
One too many.
Yeah, there we go. So there are several parts to this stress response, and first of all, the brain recognizes that there's some danger, okay, from whatever it is. And so that is focused in what we talked last night, the thalamus, that sort of central part of the brain that coordinates all the responses in our body. And it says, whoa, danger. So it sends a message out to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland secretes hormones that stimulates the adrenal gland. We have cortisol, we have adrenaline, we have noradrenaline, and all these stress hormones that are created. And so these go into the bloodstream. The liver starts turning glycogen, which is a storage form of energy in the liver, into blood sugar. Now, just this week, I had a patient come in to see me who was diabetic, and he said, you know, it's kind of crazy. But I go out for a walk in the woods, and when I go out there walking, my blood sugar goes very high, and I come back and it's high, and I've just been expending energy in the woods. I said, yes, because when you go out for your walk, your muscles say, we need fuel, and so they send a message to the liver starts releasing fuel, but you see, in the diabetic, and we'll talk more about this next week probably, the insulin is a pump that pumps blood sugar from the bloodstream into the cells. And so when diabetics don't have this pump working, so therefore there's not enough sugar getting into the cell, and so the cells are saying, we need fuel, we need fuel, we need fuel, and the liver's pumping out more and more sugar into the bloodstream trying to get that fuel going, but can't get into the cell. Okay, so that's the diabetic problem. But here with stress response, the liver starts producing sugar, it goes into the bloodstream, blood pressure goes up, we start sweating a bit, we start breathing fast in order to get ready for this run that we're going to do. Our heart rate gets up. We lose blood flow to our stomach where food is being digested because that blood needs to go to the muscles to get ready to run. So this whole process starts taking place. And but now that we're in the 21st century, these stresses are not just one-time events. They're things that just last forever. They seem to be with us all the time. We live our whole day under stress. And I think in this day and age, we're all feeling it almost every day by what's going on in the world and the country. You can't listen to the news without feeling somewhat stressed. So let me go back now through the causes here, and
Can you read what that sign says?
oh, let's see if I can figure out where that is. That's definitely California.
Yeah.
That looks like Ventura Boulevard or something. It's in Los Angeles area, yeah.
It's only 4 lanes, Barry.
Pardon me?
Can I add something to the graph up there?
Yeah, sure.
So for me, I think it's, as I look at that, I look at the chronic stress.
Yep.
And that it's just continuous ongoing, and what I'm hearing in a lot of my clients is we're really grieving humanity,
Sure.
and we're grieving this whole piece, and I see these cortisol spikes and.
Spikes, right.
It's just unreal, because this is never ending.
It's
And we
never
are
ending.
concerned, and we're really concerned of where things are going, like obvious reasons, and debt, and more work is being placed on us, and mental health.
But today we've got another issue that is really adding to stress, and it's one that we have not really talked about yet. And it's affecting all our young people in a very, very high capacity.
Yeah.
When we moved here to this part of the world, we had ball fields in every little community. We had all sorts of, there were soccer competitions, and the whole community would get together for the ball games, and the adults would be there, and the kids would be playing, we'd be cheering them on. There's not one of those ball fields left anymore.
There is here.
Okay? In our community, we have a tennis court. The youngest person that plays tennis is 70.
Yep.
We have a cross-country ski club, and the majority of people who belong to the cross-country ski club are 70s and 80s.
Right.
We can't get younger people to come and participate. So we've had a total breakdown of society's community, and we used to have little churches in various communities, and they held the community together. Those churches are all abandoned. They may hold a memorial service once a year, but that's it. So nobody gets together. I had a family come in the other day, and they were having family stress issues, and I said, when was the last time you sat down and talked as a family?
Or had dinner.
I think it's probably been 10 years. I said, when was the last time you sat around the table and had a meal together? They said, I don't know that we've ever done that.
That
And
was
it's just-
commonplace when I was growing up.
Well, sure, it's, so this whole connectedness is broken, and so the young people are all on their phones, and they like on their TikTok or their, whatever the current rage is on the phones, they like the number of likes they have and the number of hearts that they get hooked to it, but they're not connected to human beings. So this is very, very stressful, and we're seeing this stress level just skyrocketing up in all aspects of our lives.
And we see the addictions going up with it, because that's the way they deal with their stress.
And remote, working remotely.
And working
And we should
remotely,
attach
which
those
breaks down another community thing, So you're sitting at home, working in your private little room, you're not connected. One of the reasons why I have not retired is because my office is my social connectedness, okay? I connect with my community, they're basically family that are coming in. And so that connectedness is what gives me energy to keep going. So I'm afraid to miss out on that. So stress, which used to be a friend in the past to protect us, has now become public enemy number one in our society. So, what takes place in the brain when we are afraid? Most of you are probably old enough to remember this.
Yep.
What is it?
It's a firebox, a little fire
It
alarm
used
box.
to be on the
Okay?
corner of every street.
And we used to have those in the corners of, in the town where we live. And I'll tell you, as a kid, I had the strongest urge to try them out. But I was told that if you did that, you're going to get into serious trouble, okay, for a false alarm. So we have a fire alarm system in our brain as well, which is what precipitates off this alarm that something's wrong. And that is found in the amygdala, and I put the two of them together. So the red fire alarm box of the brain is the amygdala. So supposing you're at school and the fire alarm is activated. Do they have fire drills in schools anymore?
Yep,
Yeah.
they did when I went to
Yeah.
school.
Yes,
Yeah,
they
well, we
do.
certainly did when I went to school too.
Yes.
And so once the fire alarm was activated, several things would take place. Number one, all of us kids had to leave the school. We all had to file out and line up in our class to count for everybody that was accountable. But also, it passed that alarm off to some central control issue. Now, that was before 911, but now it goes to a 911 operator. And so just as the fire alarm, the amygdala here stimulates the hypothalamus, which is the 911 operator. So we have the amygdala, which is here in the center. It stimulates the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus acts as the 911 operator. And it sends the message to the pituitary gland, which is like the fire department, and the pituitary gland starts sending out fire trucks, okay? It starts sending out all these stress hormones, and they are heading out into the body. So when the fire department arrives at the school, the fire chief assesses the situation and decides if he has to call other units or whether the unit that has come is adequate for the fire. And then the hippocampus, which is another part here, it's not on this particular one. The hippocampus, it is sort of the control tower, and it decides, like the fire chief, it decides whether there's enough hormones out there to answer the stress or what happens. And it may say, yes, we have enough help, or no, send more help, send more help. And so the director of all of this is located in the very front of the brain, where the decision making is located, and that part of the brain decides, is this a real stressor or is it a false stressor? So we're going to go through a scenario. So here are our stress hormones, first of all: adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisone. These are the hormones that are secreted by the body. So we go walking across the lawn, and this is what we think we see, okay? Long, dark, and it looks like a snake. So what happens? Immediately, the amygdala registers there's a potential danger. Now, here in Maine, we don't have any poison snakes, do we?
Yeah.
We don't have any in New Brunswick. I don't think we have any here in Maine, okay? Although there may be
Southern part
some
of the
coming
state
in from
we
the
do.
south slowly. Yeah, it might.
Climate change, yeah.
Well, with climate change, yeah, we never used to have
Yeah,
chiggers in
southern
New
part.
Brunswick, and now we're having
Down by
chiggers,
Lowell.
that are out too, and that's, yeah, I'm seeing people come in with chigger bites. That used to be Tennessee and Kentucky where we had those.
That's terrible.
So the alarm bell rings in the amygdala, snake, yuck. And so the amygdala calls 911, which is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus puts the entire station into action. The pituitary gland starts secreting hormones. The adrenal gland starts secreting adrenaline. It activates all the organs of the body. Heart rate starts to go up. breathing rate starts to go up, blood goes to the muscles, you're ready to run, stomp on that snake, get rid of it, whatever. And the body prepares to fly, to fight or run. And then that frontal cortex starts to work. And it says, what is this? And we realize, okay, so I'll come back to that one. And we realize that
Oh, it's a
it's not a snake, it's a garden hose. And immediately, what happens in our body? Ooh. So all these hormones start, the prefrontal cortex says, no, it's not a snake, it's a garden hose. And it sends a message to the thalamus sends a message to the pituitary glands, the hormones are stopped being secreted, the adrenal glands stop secreting, and we can finally relax, okay? But the effect is still there for a while, okay? You might still be breathing a little bit hard, you might still be, so that's how it takes place. So I'll go back here to this one. So here we have the same series of events. We have the brain recognizing, sends a message to the pituitary gland, it sends hormones out, adrenal glands, liver, and all these reactions take place. Which, if it was a poisonous snake, and we lived in Florida instead of Maine, then it would be worthwhile. So, stress is a feeling of emotional or physical tension. And it can come from any event that makes us feel frustrated or angry or nervous. And in short bursts, it can be fine. But when it's there all the time, it becomes very, very destructive to our health. So, what sort of stresses can we have? We can have physical stresses, such as an illness. It could be a bad diagnosis that we get from a visit to the doctor. And usually, if I have to tell someone that they have cancer, the moment I say that word, there is nothing more that will register in the person's brain. Nothing. The stress reaction takes over completely. And so what I have learned over the years is I will say, I'm not going to tell you any more today. I'm going to get you to think about this, come back in 2 days, and then we're going to answer questions. Because if I don't do that, there is nothing that registers besides the word cancer. Could be psychological, as I said, a difficult colleague, debt. Could be social, a broken relationship, divorce, the death of a close family member, a friend. It could be spiritual, moral mistakes, fear of hell. I had one lady who was dying and she looked at me and she said, I'm being punished for all my bad things I've done in my life. And I just thought, what a way to face the end of life with that concept in your mind. So when the stress builds up, there are several stages that we go through with it. The first stage is the alarm reaction, seeing that snake in the grass, okay? There's an alarm, immediately the whole thing of stress builds up, and that's useful. It's useful purpose for that sudden thing you're afraid of. But if the stress continues, then we move into a different phase. So the second phase is a prolonged phase. It's called the resistance phase. And the body begins to cause long-term effects and damage to the various organs as these stress hormones are up at high levels for long periods of time. Now last night after we had talked, we had a little one-on-one talk here, and I was mentioning about, say, PTSD, okay? We're all familiar with PTSD now. My uncle, my mother's brother, came back from World War II with PTSD, but it was not known what it was at that time. And so he became a member of the Legion, and he did what Legion members do. He spent his life drinking alcohol and became a terrible, terrible alcoholic. Destroyed his whole family. And that was his way of dealing with PTSD. Nowadays, we started to learn about that during the Vietnam War, because many people from my generation came back from Vietnam under serious, serious PTSD, and we started to see the effects that that was having in life then.
PTSD, what is it?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? So it happens, it can happen after a variety of events take place, stressful events, okay? I have an EMT who's a patient of mine who got called out into the woods for a sled accident way out in the woods. And the young fellow that was out there was badly, badly injured, life-threatening injuries, and they were way far out. And they had to load him on another sled, and they had to pull him out through the woods while they're administering various resuscitative efforts on him, and trying to save limbs and life. And when they got to the nearest road where the ambulance was parked, he was just about gone. They tried to load him in, and he died on the way into the hospital. And this EMT has lived in constant, I don't even know what to describe it, constant terror since that event, constantly asking himself, what could I have done to have saved this young man's life? You know, what more could I have done? So it has become so severe for him that he can't work anymore. Every time there was a call into the ambulance service, he would launch into this stress reaction, and he was not able to go and answer the call. And it's gotten to the point, his wife is an EMT as well, and she's still working. She cannot come home and talk to him about what went on that day at work.
Yep.
If he hears an ambulance going through the city, it all gets launched again. That same stress reaction is going, and he's just terrified again. And his life is ruined because of it. So that's PTSD. So what we've now discovered is that we have to address that stressful situation and help people work through it immediately so that it doesn't develop into chronic stress or PTSD. So that's why when there's a major horrible event, a fire, a mass shooting, and I hear there was one down in Florida a day or two ago, we have people who come in, counselors who come in and work with people, help them to deal and process this event so that it doesn't turn into chronic PTSD. The same thing goes with pain. If we don't treat acute pain, say with a bad injury to a leg or to an arm, or if we don't treat that acute pain, then it has the tendency to turn into chronic pain, in which case it becomes almost impossible to treat. So we're now learning, let's treat the acute pain when it occurs immediately so that it doesn't develop into this chronic pain. So with stress, once it becomes prolonged, then we start seeing very negative effects in our bodies. And so in this resistance phase, here's what we have. We have worry, constant fear, anxiety, sleep disturbance, palpitations, just an internal malaise, an internal feeling that something isn't right, isn't good. It's just you don't feel well. I put palpitations in twice, another typo I got to take out. Muscle tension and spasm. And the muscle tension is one that I see every day in the office, you know, very tight muscles in the neck and upper back giving headaches. And it's related to unresolved stress, memory issues, difficulty concentrating. These are all part of this resistance phase. And if this resistance phase is not resolved, then we go into another phase, which is the exhaustion phase. And in the exhaustion phase, the organism is no longer able to cope. It demands a large expenditure of energy, and as the energy sources become depleted, the organism enters into a survival mode. And then we see the curve here starting to just go down as the health starts to deteriorate. And we're seeing more of this every month, every year in our society. And it's something that we are going to have to address as a society. So the production of these hormones actually starts to deplete. They're no longer being secreted. And the organism can no longer adapt. And various diseases appear. Asthma. And it's amazing how asthma can be related to this. Eczema, accelerated aging, menstrual disturbances, erectile dysfunction, cancers, and depression can become so severe that it leads to suicide. So it's a total disintegration of the body's system. So we have to find a way of learning to deal with this stress early on so that we don't get into these ultimate phases. And these are some of the things that we will look at over the course of this weekend and the next 2 weekends. But I just wanted to do the explanation of what this stress response is. Now, in our second part here, I want to go into this infection of fear because that plays a big role with the stress. And there's some very interesting things with it. So fear is an intruder. It ravages and destroys all creation. It's like a flesh-eating disease, and it consumes us until we die. And in contrast, life, health, and happiness are only found where love flows freely. And if I look at some of these things about fear, fear stalks us all, as we've just said. You know, we've just finished a COVID pandemic, and everybody was afraid during COVID. We've got Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We've got Israel's bombing of Gaza. We've got threats of nuclear war with Iran. We've got rapidly rising costs of fuel and food, and fear that we can't make ends meet. And we might be able to beat back this fear for brief moments, but it lurks in the darkness of our hearts. And it doesn't wait for an invitation to come in either. It sort of barges into our lives. It tramples our world like cattle tramping daisies. And I'm not talking about adaptive alertness. I'm talking about, adaptive alertness like would be if we were being attacked or a house was on fire or something. But this is just chronic, innate internal fear, a noxious feeling of uneasiness boiling in our minds and threatens to destroy every ounce of happiness. We run from it, but it propels us ever forward as we search and grope and hope for relief. I would say probably 50% of the people I see in the office have a basic underlying fear, worry, concern issue. Variety of causes, but it still is a very major cause as to what I see. Fear comes from a breakdown of trust. And as I said last night, we can put some of these things into religious terms, but sometimes these religious terms have lost their meaning. They've just become, words that we just sort of use. To me, the basic principle of Christianity is a healthy relationship with our Creator, trusting, loving relationship, and a healthy relationship with everybody else, okay, with all those around us. That's the essence of it. Now, in churches, we've added all sorts of rituals, and we've added all sorts of ceremony and ideas and thoughts and names and you name it, but that's the essence of it. Healthy relationships. That's what it's all about. And so fear breaks relationships. Fear comes from threats of harm to us. At one end of the fear range comes the fear of horrid dictators, Hitler, Stalin, Idi Amin, Pol Pot, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, you can name the list of them. There's fear that's propelled and frequently generated because we are told that we have to be afraid of other people. Hitler said the reason that Germany had to be afraid was because there were Jews in Germany, so he launched it all against them and the gypsies. Now we're blaming immigrants in our country for everything. We're trying to get rid of them.
I didn't come for politics.
No, but these are the facts of today, okay? And so we have all sorts of reasons why fear is being generated. And so fear becomes a weapon of society. It splits, it divides, it invades, it conquers, and it destroys. And these ambassadors of evil with hearts and minds that are so pushed by everything except love causes some of the societies that we have to just sort of break down. At the other end of the spectrum is the one that I call the human mouse. They're afraid of rejection, they're fearful of embarrassment, fearful of criticism, people made meek by fear and abuse. They never say no, they never stand up, and because they're afraid of what everyone else thinks, and they too are just afraid of everything. And in between these two extremes exists all manner of fear-ridden situations. The playground bully, the proud, the arrogant, the racist, the bigot, the sexist. We find alcoholic, the drug addict, the sex addict, the shopaholic, religious fundamentalist. You know, we have a whole collection of results that come from these uncontrolled fear. The constant firing of our stress hormones, our stress response, puts our brain out of balance, and we overreact to environmental stimuli. And evolutionary biologists have suggested that the fight or flight response, which was an adaptive reaction initially to promote survival, is now firing and destroying our very existence. It impairs healthy thinking, it abuses the body, and the longer that this alarm fires, the more pronounced the damage. So here is the bottom line. When fear increases, love, growth, development, and healthy thinking decrease. It becomes this teeter-totter, okay? That when one grows, the other goes down. And we know that love, growth, healthy thinking are the key fundamental factors of life. Without them, we cannot exist. Now, it's very, very interesting to know that the fetus, before it's born, is influenced by what the mother is feeling, okay? If mom is stressed before birth, that fetus is subjected to all these stress hormones that then paralyze the cognitive thinking capacity of that child and strengthen the amygdala before it's even born. Wow. It's just, yeah, it's amazing. We have a family friend who, during pregnancy, they found out that the child had considerable abnormality. And it had to be born in a special pediatric hospital. It had no abdominal wall, all its intestinal tract was all outside. Mother was very, very stressed, of course, throughout the pregnancy with delivery, and then very stressed by a baby who was in neonatal intensive care for a period of time, cried constantly. And so when we first visited them, Alberta picked up the baby and held the baby, and it just quieted down. It just went to sleep. And the mother was a little bit distraught. She said, well, how come the baby won't do that for me? Well, we said, it's because you've been stressed through the whole time. The baby knows that level of stress, and it is stressed too because of that. but I'm not stressed with this baby. And the baby knows it, and it just falls and goes to sleep. So it's this balance, and so it becomes very important that the mother, when she's pregnant, tries to avoid stress as much as possible. And then the brain develops in a better way. So the stress hormones cross the placental barrier and the developing fetal brain. And did you know that if you have 100 billion brain cells, and those brain cells all develop over 9 months, do you know how many brain cells are developing every second? That's astounding numbers, okay? And those brain cells in that developing child are just so responsive to all the surrounding variables. And so the first 8 years of the baby's life, the brain actually starts destroying brain cells. Because the baby's born with all these brain cells, and now it's being remodeled according to what it's being exposed to. And so in a healthy environment, we can remodel even the brains of a mom who's been, a child who was born to a mom who's been stressed, if we can get calmness and peace and quietness. But that baby's brain is just remodeling at a tremendous speed after birth. So at first, the loss of all these brain cells doesn't sound too protective, but it's sort of like Michelangelo getting a block of marble, okay? And it's initially a huge block, and it's got to be chipped away at and pieces broken off as he sculpts to get his masterpiece out of that block of marble. And that's what is happening to the child. When a child is loved, the area of the brain which secretes oxytocin, the bonding hormone, develops, and the child is able to connect to other people and build deep personal relationships, whereas the child who is not loved struggles to do that. And we all know the experiment that took place in Romania under Ceausescu, where they took babies and stuck them in orphanages, and they were never touched or loved, or and they all died within the first 2 years of life. It was astounding experiment in Romania. And so there is a story of a baby whose name was Kamala, who was found living with wolves by a missionary. And the child was 8 years old when it was found. It had been raised by animals. The child could not speak and made growling noises just like the wolves made. It walked on all fours and lapped food like a dog. And despite of living for 9 more years, the child never learned to speak more than a few words, more than 50 words, and the child died at age 17. The importance of this connectedness, this warm, embracing, loving environment for a child. So this type of programming has Jeannie was locked inside a room for 20 months of age, and lived the next 11 years of her life in isolation. When she was rescued at age 13, she was profoundly disabled and despite intensive rehabilitation efforts, never really learned to speak correctly. So you can see how important these tragic cases demonstrate that normal brain processes, neural circuits are not used, they fail to develop. If they are used, they do develop. The ones that are not used are pruned or deleted, and those circuits that are used are strengthened and expanded. And this happens through the entire brain. And therefore, the activities that repeatedly and regularly excite or fire the amygdala, the alarm center during childhood, will enhance its development and impair the development of the prefrontal cortex where love is found. Okay? So think of all the stresses that we give to our children every day. And no wonder we are seeing this increase in brain dysfunction in children and young people today. One of the unheralded factors contributing to the rise of fear and psychiatric disorder is the high prevalence of theatrical entertainment, which includes television, okay? Because what are some of the emotions that are stimulated by that? There's some of the stress reactions. And look what's available on television, what people watch on television. Theatrical entertainment is designed through pretext and artificial enactments to cause an emotional reaction, while for the most part disengages us from critical thinking, okay? So it's designed to stimulate the amygdala, and when the amygdala is stimulated, it grows and develops, and the prefrontal cortex, which is where rational thought is produced, shrinks, okay? Now, it's very interesting to know that in Canada, televisions were introduced in 1945, US 1945 as well. And when they were introduced, the homicide rates went up 92% and 93%. In South Africa, television did not come until 1972. And from 1945 to 1972, the homicide rate was at 7%, was at minus 7%, or 7%, I probably put a typo there. But in 1972, it increased by 130% after television came out. You know, that's really quite astounding. This type of programming has a similar effect on most human brains, but children between birth and 8 years of age are particularly vulnerable because of this massive modification of the brain that's taking place at this time. So, when I was doing my psychiatry rotation many long years ago, my attending physician brought 2 of us residents into a room with a patient who could not speak. Okay, he had a hysterical aphonia, so it was because of a stress in his life, he was not able to speak. And so the professor decided he was going to do hypnosis on the man. So he did some hypnosis for him and was going to try to help get around this stressful situation through the hypnosis. The next day we went in to see this patient. He said to one of my colleagues, he said, "I want you to do the hypnosis today." The colleague said, "Okay." So as we were taking the patient into the room, he said, he told the patient, the professor did, "I'm going to ask Dr. Christensen to do the hypnosis today, but he probably can't do it because it's his first time." Okay, so he told the patient. So my colleague went and did all the same things the professor had done, trying to get the hypnotic state lined up. And ultimately the patient said, "I'm sorry, but it's not working today," and got up to left. So as the patient left, the professor looked at the 2 of us and he said, "What happened? What did you do wrong?" And my fellow resident said, "I don't know." And I said, "I know what went wrong. I heard you tell the patient on the way into the room that he could not do it because it was his first time."
Right.
And the professor looked at me and smiled and he said, "Absolutely correct." He said, "The human mind is indelible. Every word, every image that it sees is registered in that brain." And he said, "And if you think that the brain of a 60-year-old is indelible, imagine that of a 6-year-old. I have never forgot that interaction in that psychiatry rotation. Everything that we register in our brains has an effect. Pardon?
Including the news.
Yes.
How old were you when you got that revelation?
I was in my early 20s.
Well, they've been brainwashing everybody that watched TV since the 1950s, and they're still doing it.
1945.
Yeah,
That is
well,
correct.
The
And
CIA is the one in back of it.
Yeah.
Still doing it. I mean, that's what our football's all about, brainwashing.
Sadly, many people, many parents, the mainstream media, and even church groups have concluded that this problem is just content driven. The old adage, garbage in and garbage out, has been used by many a well-meaning preacher to discourage bad content. And while it's appropriate to avoid bad content, the problem with theatrical entertainment is not just content driven, it's what it's designed to stimulate. So it stimulates our emotional center and not our cognitive thought center. And so this primary issue is called is one of neural development. If we overstimulate the limbic system by theatrical entertainment, and we decrease the use of our prefrontal cortex during the developmental years, children will grow up with brains that are out of balance. And I'm noticing,
Dr. Perry,
Yeah.
repeat that, I didn't.
I'm saying that if we overstimulate the emotional center of the brain
When they're
during
young.
these development years, and we don't stimulate the thought process part of the brain, then children grow up with brains that are out of balance, okay? And so I'm wondering now about all the screen time that children have starting from their earliest ages. My grandchildren, if we go into a restaurant and there was a TV on in the restaurant, were fixated on that TV, no matter what was on it. It could have been a commercial, it could have been anything, but they were fixated on it. You couldn't even eat the meal. And I'm noticing with our new little grandson, the moment the phone is on, he's there for the phone. He's 8 months old. He's fixated on the screen as soon as it's there. And so I'm wondering myself what the effect of screen time is going to be on another generation of people that we have. It's just an idea that I have. So while theatrical entertainment negatively affects the brain development, think about childhood trauma. Think about the abuse that happens to children. Dr. Andrea Danisi and her team followed 800 individuals for 32 years to determine the impact of childhood stress on mental and physical health. And they identified 3 measures of severe childhood stress: physical or sexual abuse, neglect, and social economic deprivation. So we know that the children who have been abused struggle for the rest of their lives and frequently will perpetuate that same abuse as they become adults. The neglect, major issue. And the socioeconomic deprivation, the poorest people, the poorest families we have in our communities desperately need our help. Desperately need our help. The results show that the more childhood stress, the higher the incidence of depression, inflammation, and metabolic illnesses later in life. The study concluded that children exposed to adverse psychosocial experiences have enduring emotional immune system abnormalities and metabolic abnormalities and contribute to an elevated risk of age-related diseases. Wow. Wow. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, anxiety disorders are now the most common mental health problem in North America, affecting 30% of adults at some point in time in their lives. And the rate of anxiety disorders appear to be rising every year. When the fear center of the brain is stimulated and activated and is not calmed, there is a cascade of events which take its toll on our bodies and our brains. And fear is frequently used as...
Excuse me,
Yeah.
can you just repeat what you just said again?
Sure. I said, when when the,
Fear.
yes, just one sec, I'll just find what I was just read there. Sorry. When the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, is activated and not calmed, it triggers a cascade of events which takes a toll on our bodies and our brains.
Yes,
Okay? Yeah.
okay.
So and think of where all fear is used. Okay? Churches use fear to manipulate their members. Okay? COVID causes fear. Politicians cause fear. Parents create fear in their children because that's a behavior modification mechanism. Okay, that's why it's used. But as we stimulate that fear center, it causes long-term damaging effects. The sympathetic nervous system activates the release of stress hormones and inflammatory hormones such as cytokines, and this inflammation wreaks havoc in the body and it increases illness, metabolic problems, and pain. Now, when we get to our section on Alzheimer's disease next weekend, we're going to look at how the basic fundamental cause of Alzheimer's disease is inflammation. And I don't know if some of you have heard that research that just came out this week, or 2 weeks now, but those who get the shingles vaccine have less incidence of dementia than those who don't. And the reason is it calms down, it calms inflammation. Okay? So it's just interesting new research. It just came out within the last 10 days. Okay? But inflammation breaks holes in our blood-brain barrier. We'll get to this next week. And those holes in the blood-brain barrier allow certain chemicals to enter the brain that normally would be kept out. And we are very suspicious that this is part of the problem with dementia. Now, breaking holes in the blood-brain barrier, and our pharmacist isn't here today, but it's frequently pharmaceutically engineered. Because drug companies want their drugs to get into the brain.
Yes.
And so they engineer them to break a hole in the blood-brain barrier so that it has an action in the brain. But we'll get into that next weekend, okay? Okay, there is a particular factor that is secreted in the brain. It's called, it's complicated, and I don't have a screen for it, but it's called BNDF, okay? And that stands for brain-derived neurotropic factor, okay? Brain-derived, so it means it comes from the brain. Neurotropic means it helps the development of the brain factor. So it's something that the brain secretes to help the brain repair and improve and grow. It's like fertilizer for the brain, okay? And so the continued elevation of fear-based, stress-based hormones in our body paralyzes BNDF, okay? So it suppresses the genes that produce the proteins that are called BNDF, which is brain fertilizer. When this protein is available, the neurons that get it grow stronger and send out more connections to other brain cells and increase brain circuitry. So it facilitates learning and growth. The brain even makes new neurons under the influence of BNDF. So we can actually create new brain cells, something that we never thought was possible until just recently. When this protein is available in the right regions of the brain, we can learn faster and easier. When this protein is unavailable, the brain stops making new neurons, and the neurons that we already have begin to die. Okay? So BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, is very important. In the brain, the white supporting cells of the brain that surround the neurons are like the astronaut's spacesuit. It's what protects the astronaut, it's what protects the brain. These are called glial cells. Just as the astronaut spacesuit provides a safe environment for the astronaut, the white cells that surround the neurons, dendrites, axons, connections, bathe the neurons in rich nutritional fluids that they need. Not only do the neurons themselves make B, D, and F, but the supporting cells also make B, D, and F, and keeps the brain healthy. So this B, D, and F is very, very important for the health of our brains. But when we have these inflammatory hormones secreted, cytokines, cortisol, adrenaline, and when they are in high levels from chronic fear, chronic anxiety, it causes damage to these cells and the brain starts to shrink. Stress, the fight or flight response, shuts down growth by suppressing B, D, and F. And learning and development become dysfunctional. The chronic stress signal causes the message to be transmitted to the DNA of the brain cells. And I don't know if you know what epigenetics are, but there is some very good information coming out with epigenetics. And I'll just take a little deviation on that and show, we took some rats and we exposed them to the smell of menthol. And when they were exposed to the smell of menthol, we also injected something into the rat that paralyzed its immune system. Okay? So the rats learned, you know, the Pavlov experience, they learned that the smell of menthol and their immune system would decrease. Before long, the rats, all you had to do was introduce the smell of menthol and their immune system started to fall apart. But the interesting thing is the next generation of rats had the same thing.
Exactly.
It took 3 generations before that was removed from the rats. Okay? So then they reversed the experiment. They exposed another set of rats to menthol smell, and they enhanced their immune system. Okay? And so before long, the rats give them menthol, and their immune system kicks into gear. And then they watched the next generation, and it was the same thing. It was passed on for 3 generations. So now we're learning that these changes that take place in our brains actually changes the DNA of the brain, and that is passed on to the next generation and the next generation. Wow. Boy, that's just really remarkable. And so this can be damaging not only to ourselves, but to our children and our grandchildren.
Damaging or
beneficial. That's exactly right. So remember the neuroplasticity concept that the brains can heal, and if we exercise healthy habits, then that can change and we can get B and D, F secreted and our brains will grow and change. So that's the good news of this. It's not too late for any of us. So I'm going to take this on to a sort of a spiritual connection right now, because God's methods for increasing brain health and nurturing mental stability are, when they are applied, the brain circuits of the prefrontal cortex grow stronger, and despite previous damage, healing occurs. Healthy connections grow and develop. And if you are someone who suffered from abuse during childhood, or if you've struggled with an overly active limbic system resulting in too much aggression, irritability, impatience, anger, etc., God's methods bring healing. And what are those methods? Truth, love, freedom, understanding a God who loves us deeply rather than one who's waiting to find the least fault to condemn us to burn in hell forever. Being truthful, eliminating falsehoods. And this is particularly important for anyone who suffered abuse. Abused children, because of the level of brain development, will misconstrue the meaning of abuse and internalize distortions about themselves. Typical falsehoods such as, I'm ugly, I'm gross, I'm nasty, I'm dirty, I'm disgusting, I'm unlovable. But we need to learn to change that. We need to learn to give. Actively seek to help others. Get involved with some sort of volunteer activity to help someone else. I often say there are three things that are important for a successful life. There's your profession, what you do to earn a living. There's your passion, the stuff that just really makes you enjoy life. And then there's a mission, something that we do for somebody else for no benefit to ourselves, but just because the need is there. And that component of reaching out and helping others is just so important. So we learn to give. We establish relationships with people of loving and mature character, and we terminate destructive and exploitive relationships. We trust God with our life and with our life outcomes. We choose to fulfill our known responsibilities in harmony with a clear conscience, and we trust God to see how things are going to turn out. One of the greatest sources of worry and fear is trying to make things turn out the way we want them to turn out, rather than simply choosing what is right in the governance of self and trusting God with the outcomes of whatever happens. Live in harmony with the physical design protocols for life, a healthy diet, adequate sleep, regular exercise, and avoiding toxins. And I've just been looking, of course, as birthdays collect and trips around the sun augment, I'm just looking at healthy aging. And 5 factors keep coming up, everything I read. Good nutrition, regular exercise, adequate sleep, social connectedness, and an atmosphere of love and gratitude that pervades us at all times. 5 incredibly natural, boosting things that help us age correctly. When mistakes are made, let's remove guilt as soon as possible. When someone injures us and hurts us, let's forgive them as quickly as we possibly can. Because if we don't, we hold on to anger and grudges. It's like being chained to that particular person forever. We need to move on, we need to forgive and get rid of the anger.
Barry, can I comment on something like that?
Sure.
Jesus breathed the Holy Spirit on his disciples just before he died, and said, whose sins you forgive, they are forgiven, and whose sins you retain, they are retained. Guess where we retain them?
We retain them in our own mind, yeah. So we need to resolve fear, for fear truly destroys. It's love that heals and restores. And genuine love is only experienced when we realize how much we are loved by our Creator. So I think the main thing from this morning's talk is the destructive aspect of fear and how we need to address that issue, not only for ourselves, but for our children. And I think to myself, and I used to threaten my kids, and Alberta used to say to me, don't do that. You're damaging them. You're damaging them forever. And it just took me a long, I guess I'm a slow learner, because it just took me a long time to really recognize that. So hopefully I will do better with grandchildren than children. So let's remember that love heals and restores, fear destroys, and there is a constant battle between these two in all of our minds and in the entire universe, and we just need to focus on one, activate that prefrontal cortex. Let's shrink down that amygdala as much as we possibly can.